Welcome to Now, Near, and the Future with Naila and Quinn Harrington. A podcast that's part crystal ball, part microscope, and part rocket ship.
Season 2, Episode 1, A Trust Crisis in Leadership, with special guest Leo Bottary. Welcome to Now, Near, and the Future, Season 2. I'm Quinn Harrington.
And I'm Naila. Today, we're exploring how the workplace is being rewired from the inside out. Very excited.
And we're joined by Leo Bottary today, and we're talking about the shift from traditional top-down leadership to something called peer power, and why your best ideas might not be coming from the corner office.
Leo Bottary, founder of Peer Novation, going to ask about that a bit more, and the person who literally wrote the book on peer learning. Leo, you've said that great minds think alike, but great teams think together. What's the difference?
Thinking alike sometimes can be about groupthink, right? And we don't want to kind of go in that direction, but we do want people to think together. We want them to bring their different perspectives. We want people to be able to voice their point of view on any given subject or question and all of that. And when you get those perspectives together and people are actually thinking together, then you can come to a better result as opposed to thinking alike. And sometimes we're going to dismiss options that we shouldn't.
Now.
So let's start with what's happening right now. Leo, you've worked in the organization across 5 continents, and you've said traditional hierarchical leadership is facing the biggest challenges ever. What are you seeing in the workplace today?
There's been a pretty dramatic shift, right? So I'm a baby boomer. I grew up in companies that were pretty much power cultures, not a lot different from the way we were brought up. You didn't ask a lot of questions. It wasn't a democracy. You were told what to do. That's the way it was. So when you shift from your family into companies back days, the transition was rather easy. Today, I'm approached by CEOs all the time that say to me, wow, these employees, all they want is all this feedback and all this dialogue and all this conversation about everything. And I will say to them that in many respects, this newer generation is simply just trying to replicate the relationship they had with their parents and really bring it into the workplace in many respects. So there's much more horizontally taking place in workplaces today, really than ever before. People are truly relying on one another. We have a lot of uncertainty in the world. People don't trust institutions. There's a study from the Edelman Trust Barometer, for example, that shows a lot of the trends in the last 25 years were, at first we were wondering who to believe, right? We weren't believing companies, so we looked to trusted sources. Then we want to talk directly to the end user. By 2018, we didn't basically know what to believe anymore. We couldn't even agree on a common set of facts. So people are looking to one another in the workplace in a very big way. And it's very much less about always looking, to their leaders, if you will, for the answers, and much more about how they work together. And the implications on this are huge because we have organizational change which is going to happen that much faster than it ever has before. And it's not as if the track record for organizational change is that great. Failure and underperformance is particularly high. And McKinsey and others will tell you that one of the big reasons for that is because all too often you can't get people behind whatever initiative you're trying to get out there if you don't have everyone kind of all on the same page, right? And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy from that perspective. So leaders today can't just shout from the top and expect whatever, to trickle down and for everyone to follow. It's very much about how do we engage those influencers in our companies who may not have the loftiest title, but they're really influential with other employees. And I think the more that we can reach into our organizations and make sure that we are bringing everybody's talents and everyone's perspectives to the table, the easier it's going to be to, I think, be successful in leading through change far more often.
That reminds me of the former CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman. He did a lot around purpose and embedding purpose and sustainability in organizations. And he did a report or a study recently where it was not only about the leaders that the employees believed in, but they also talked about wanting to work for more purposeful organizations and how peers want to actually work in more innovation and be part of the solution. So I've got 2 questions for you around what you've just said. One was, how are organizations responding to this reality that you're talking about, where employees are thinking differently, they want things differently from the organization? So how are they responding to that? And then the second question was around your influencers. how do you identify those influencers in an organization?
The thing I love about having you here, Leo, is that I can see Naila is just lighting up because her core business is employee engagement and
Yes.
communications, where I'm just like, okay, can we talk about like design or, video? And Naila's like, hush, Quinn, hush. I'm on a roll here.
You're right. That's exactly it. And influences is one of those things that we look at with an engagement perspective.
To address your first question, what I see really happening out there is a real shift in how accountability is being looked at today. And I think those who are more progressive are finding that it isn't about holding people accountable. It isn't about wielding accountability as if it's a sword, or if it's just an opportunity for an employee to get in trouble. What they're really shifting to is saying, you have responsibility for something. And the reason you have responsibility for something is because we believe in you. You matter in this organization. And that makes people feel really good. And by the way, we believe in you. You have that responsibility. We know you will bring your very best to that. And by the way, you have a team to support you here. I've heard CEOs who speak about accountability like, hey, I want one person accountable for that so I have one throat to choke. That's literally the idea. Well, obviously, that's very different from the model I just described, where when people feel that sense of personal responsibility for bringing their best. And I think when you look at peers who influence one another to do that, so again, it's not top-down driven, it's people lifting each other up. I tell a story. When I worked at Mullen Lowe, I went to one of my first meetings, and it had to do with taking on a new client and pitching their business. The level of preparation those people in that room had for that meeting was way beyond where I was in that meeting. And all I thought of was, wow, it was a welcome to the NFL moment for me. I thought, if I am going to play in this league, I need to raise my game. No boss had to tell me that or anything like that. This is just, if you want to hang with these people, this is how they roll. They show up to meetings and they are ready in a way that, maybe beyond what you thought. So I think that becomes really important. And I think regarding key influencers, they're not too tough to spot. Most leaders, I lead CEO group meetings all the time. And every one of them, when I say, how many of you have people that you can think of right now who again, may not have the loftiest title, but they're really influential with other employees? Every hand in the room goes up. They absolutely know who those people are. And if you don't, then you don't know your organization very well. You need to be engaging at that level and kind of understanding where those pockets of influence lie. There is a top-down element to it, of course, but there's also a large horizontal component as well. And if you think of it like the construction of a building, what gives that vertical structure strength is what is going on horizontally. And I think it's very much the same in organizations.
You're right. And influences, you can see it in the behavior and how they act. I do this SDG games, and it's a simulation about how you behave, act, how you run your business in the world, and make sure you're not impacting the world negatively. And in that game, what we do is we observe the behavior, and you can clearly see which ones are the influencers, which ones care and are leading the way, which ones are followers or want to be part of the solution but not keen to lead the way. So yeah, it's about behavior as well that you're observing in an organization. And that doesn't mean, influencers and leadership is the correlation between the two?
No. Well, yes and no. So let me put it this way. Let me restate that, because I was thinking of it in terms of positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
There are influencers that can be absolute ambassadors for greatness. But then there are influencers who I would use the term are ringleaders in an organization. These aren't dissenters. Dissenters can be really helpful in an organization. If someone is inclined to see, okay, where all of the problem areas are, great. Let's bring those folks together. Let's get in a room and talk about, okay, so if we can fix these 2 or 3 things, we're good here, right? Sure. And then they get involved and they do it. The ringleader has no interest in doing that. The ringleader wants to sit in the cheap seats, basically, and say, hey, if I were CEO, this is how the world would look. And they're constantly just picking and hammering at everything. Those people can be really toxic in the organization. Unfortunately, they can be really influential too, which makes them, I think, I refer to them as organizational terrorists, basically. It is really, problematic when you've got, people like that in the organization. And quite frankly, I don't care how high a performer you think they are. They could be your top salesperson or whatever. They are costing you in incalculable ways in other areas. And I think those people either have to be coached to behave really differently or they don't need to be there. And I feel really strongly about that. In fact, it's really interesting. I listened to something recently where Gary Vaynerchuk was making the exact same case, that if you have people that can't be good people, that can't be positive contributors to one another and to the organization, I don't care how talented they are, they're never going to be, I think very helpful.
Yeah. So you question, when you talk about people and how they grow within a company, sometimes you question the type of people that are chosen and promoted, right? So that, even though you've asked for peer feedback, it's not really listened to because it's someone who's making a decision about who's being promoted in an organization. And they may not be the great leaders. They may not be great people's person. For me, that's important. Someone who can really be a people's person or work it with the dynamics of a team, with your peers and all of that. Do you see?
But you're speaking to culture there, and I think that's really important, right? We are what we tolerate. So I think you're making an excellent point there. So
I like that. We are what we tolerate.
Hey, Naila, you remember having Sadaf on here in season 1 and she was talking about quiet leadership?
Yes.
How do you factor in people who may not have the most dynamic personality be seen as an influencer, but when they speak with a lot of gravity?
And yes, and I think that's very true. There are very much those people like that. And because of the fact that they're not weighing on every single thing all the time, because they're respected, not just in the meeting, but outside of the meeting, people understand that these people are really good and they're good players and they're good people. And they may not speak up often, but when they do, everyone kind of pays attention. There are certainly those folks. I also, though, feel that even when you have an organization where you've created a great deal of psychological safety, right? Which Amy Edmondson, who coined the term in 1999, would say that would define it as a place that's safe for interpersonal risk-taking, right? It doesn't mean that everyone is always going to be that person who will speak up. And this is where I think it is important to not just for the leader to invite that person's voice to the conversation, but for everyone to do that. We all have a role in that. Just because we're not a leader of the team doesn't mean we can't be a leader in the team. It doesn't mean that, during the course of a conversation, I might say, hey, we'd love to hear from you on X on this because we know that's important to you. And so you can invite them into the conversation sometimes, not call them out, but just invite them in, which can be helpful for those folks who may tend to lay back. Because every one of us truly brings gifts to the workplace. And all too often, the people in your company don't recognize that genius that they bring to the team and recognize that, hey, this is like a jazz ensemble. You can't remove instruments or have people not playing and expect it to perform at the same level. So I think once people start recognizing, again, it does, all of these things in many respects kind of bring us down to this idea of mattering and making people feel that they matter, that you believe in them, they believe in themselves, and what a difference that can make for everyone.
It touches
Very
on
well
that.
put.
Yeah.
We're about ready for Around the Room.
Are we? Are you
Yes.
moving me on already?
Shall we go around the room?
Yes.
Around the room.
Who's starting? Leo?
I guess you are, Naila. You spoke first.
Okay, fine. So what's been happening? I thought we were over with podcasts and we were resting, but clearly not. I'm basically trying to plan out my business for the Q4 and the next year. So I'm thinking about business plans and where do I need to network more and grow the business. So yeah, that's on my mind nowadays.
I was attended a board meeting for the School of Creative Arts and Letters at Flagler College, my alum. And we had a breakout session where we got to talking about agentic AI and how very soon we're moving into end-to-end interconnected AI systems. I gave a talk there a couple years ago, predicted we would be seeing this in 5 years. I was wrong. We're going to be seeing it starting in early 2026. And big companies are already looking into this technology and piloting it. So it's going to be a big change for people in marketing and communications and honestly across the supply chain. How about you, Leo?
Lots of travel. I've been traveling everywhere. In fact, tomorrow I leave for Chicago, then I'll be in Halifax, Nova Scotia, then I'll be in Seattle and Walla Walla, Washington through Friday. So the travel is coast to coast through anywhere in the U.S. and anywhere in Canada right now. And so it's keeping me really busy. And I still have, I want to say, another speaking engagements between now and the end of the year. Yeah,
Wow.
It's going to be. And then January, I'm hitting the ground running. I think I have 13 in January. So it's It's a thing.
Where can people go and see your schedule of things that they would be able to attend?
They can't because most of these are all private meetings.
Okay.
Most of them are either CEO group meetings or they're company engagements. And those companies could be anybody as large as like a Lockheed Martin or as small as a 10 or 20 person firm, and everywhere in the middle, because everybody's got teams, everybody's got people stuff going on, and everyone, I think is always looking to see how they can, be better.
Let's properly introduce our guest, Leo Bottary, the founder of Peer Novation and an award-winning author of multiple books on peer learning and team dynamics, including Peer Novation and The Power of Peers. He's also an adjunct professor at Rutgers University. After decades in corporate experience and PR, Leo discovered the transformative power of peer advisory groups and has dedicated his career to helping organizations harness peer influence for higher performance. His work spans 5 continents, proving that the best solutions often come from within organizations, not from the top down. Leo, where can people find you on social and online?
So certainly LinkedIn is probably where I'm most active, and there's some activity on X, probably less so on like Facebook, and some on Facebook just because of the tendency of Europeans to use Facebook still quite a bit for business, but by and large LinkedIn, and then of course my website at peernovation.biz.
Excellent. Shall we move into the near segment?
Let's do it.
This one's mine, Naila. Are you going to be okay?
I know, yes, I'm going to be fine.
All right. We'll try to get through this quickly so we can get to some of your questions, because I know this is like your baby. Leo, let's shift to the near future.
Near.
The next 3 to 5 years. Here's a statistic that caught my attention. By 2030, millennials and Gen Z will make up 75% of the workforce. How will this fundamentally change how organizations operate?
It's going to challenge leaders, again, to engage more horizontally than just vertically. And there's no question about that. I think, when you look at millennials and Gen Zs, these are not generations I would describe as naturally trusting of hierarchical leadership. So I think whatever's happening across your organization is likely not only continue, but likely intensify. And I think beyond that, the pace of change is going to be that much quicker. So there's going to be a whole lot more to talk about. When people get information about change or information about really anything going on in their company. Actually, Edelman Trust Barometer in 2019 asked employees the question, where do you find out what is really happening in your organization? And topping the list of all the places people get information informally from my coworkers was at the top. Now, you have to think about how they asked the question, though. Where do you find out what's really happening in your organization? So the chances are good that they heard whatever news from any one of those other sources that are available to them. But their fellow employees is where they find out what it means. So someone announces a change. Do we like it? We don't like it. We think it's going to work? I'm not so sure. By the way, last year there was this big announcement, a lot of fanfare. A month later, no one was talking about it anymore. So are we to hold back on this a little bit, or are we to dive in here? And these are the kinds of conversations that happen across your organization, which is why you don't want them happening and not have some level of understanding and engagement when it comes to that. So that becomes really, really important. And I see that as a big factor, not the least of which also you're going to be factoring in AI into the human component to this as well in the next 3 to 5 years in a major way.
Yeah, I know Naila's a little nervous about that. At first, when we first met, she was quite dismissive on it. And I was like, oh no, girlfriend. Like, you don't understand stuff that's happening.
I'm getting there, actually. I'm starting to know how to use it for my benefit and obviously make it a tool of an enabler, not replacing certain things. Yes. Right? So, yeah.
There was just real quickly, there was a great article in MIT Sloan Management Review pretty recently where someone created a peer group. Now, this peer group was created using generative AI. And the peers involved people living in debt. So the peer group had Sun Tzu, it had Buddha, it had Steve Jobs, but then it also had Oprah Winfrey, Elon Musk, a whole host of folks. It was probably like 12 to 16 people, right? So it kind of begged the question, all right, well, what do I need like a human peer group for when I can get all of these perspectives? I can summon them anytime I want. So if I get up at 2:00 in the morning and I have an idea and I want to bring my peer group into play, I can do that. Now, of course, the article continues and says, okay, but time out. That's humans bring a lot more to the table than just what you might get from these generative AI figures. And so I think when we understand how, we coexist with AI in a way that, again, empowers us as opposed to replaces us is become important. And the only way to do that is better stick your hands in the clay and start diving in now, because this is going to be that much faster and that much more daunting than when people were embracing the internet and websites and everything back then. This will blow past you in a minute if you don't, I think, start digging in and start learning and just playing, just experiment, just find out, and I'm having so much fun with it.
Any examples?
Yes. I've been playing around recently, not just with ChatGPT 5, but also with Google's Notebook LM. And the difference between the two and how they function is that you'll look at ChatGPT 5, which basically has access to everything out there available on the internet and all of that. Notebook LM works where I provide the source material, and then it does its analysis or whatever. So a thing I did recently was I wanted to get a sense of, so Peer Novation was never created, at least primarily in any way, to address employee well-being, right, and employee wellness in the workplace. Yet it became evident over time that, and it was kind of intuitive after a while too, that boy, actually the things we do that actually drive greater productivity are also the things that make people feel less anxious, less stressed, and all of these other things, which may seem counterintuitive, but it was interesting. So I ended up finding out that Canada probably leads the world when it comes to psychological health and safety and championing that. And so I looked at some major studies that came out of Canada. I looked at some studies that came out of the American Psychological Association and other major organizations in the U.S. And I put those things together, and I basically, so you've got, let's ballpark it at like 500 pages worth of research and information and studies. And then I laid in the Peer Novation book, and I basically said, how well do the principles and practices of Peer Novation address this mountain of evidence and these issues as it relates to employee wellness? Within seconds, not weeks, that it would have taken me to do this by myself. Within seconds, I got an incredible analysis about how well things fit, what the constraints are. It was extraordinary. So I'm playing with it like that. And then one other quick example, I'm an opinion columnist for CEO World Magazine. I have over 190 articles on that platform that address group and team issues and all of that. And so what I've done is using Notebook LM, you can create a podcast. So what I do is I take an article I wrote for CEO World, I put it into Notebook LM. They create like a 12 to 16 minute podcast, and it's a conversation, what sounds like two human beings that are taking a deep dive, and they call it Deep Dive. So what I did was I decided to name the characters, and I call them Dwayne and Jane. And of course, there's an AI in the spelling of both of them. And they're these little cartoon characters, and they have a show that I do at the beginning of every week. And so the idea is that they take one of the articles, it's the Peer Novation Deep Dive, and you join, Dwayne and Jane for their conversation about it. And by the way, their conversation about the article goes beyond the article. It truly does. And it has all these insights and all these things that it brings up. It is so much fun. And so extraordinary that I'm running this little show on LinkedIn, once a week, and just having a ball with it. And I used ChatGPT 5, interestingly enough, to create the graphic that are the two characters. And then I just change it up depending on the topic, every one picture where they're sitting and they've got little microphones in front of them, like doing the podcast. And then there's another where they're reading a CEO World magazine as if they're reading the article. And then underneath it'll talk about what it is. And then I've got all kinds of holiday images and everything that I created. So when Halloween comes out, for example, you're going to see Dwayne and Jane in full Halloween regalia, and it'll be kind of fun.
Wow.
I love it. Quinn's always giving me her tips and tricks on AI and constantly guiding me on where to do
I've definitely
things.
heard of AI-driven podcasts, but you're the first person I've ever talked to who's created one. What kind of engagement are you getting?
People are having fun with it. It's hard for me to kind of measure the engagement because of the way and how I'm posting it at this point. But I'm really getting really good response to it. And some of it's online, some of it's offline.
Where can we watch it?
And I just amuse myself with it. So
where can we watch or listen to it? Is it on your personal page?
If you go to
Peer Novation?
if you go to my posts on LinkedIn, you'll find some Dwayne and Jane posts,
Okay.
and you just click on. So I always make the article available, and then there's the show itself. Again, the podcasts typically run anywhere from 12 to 16 minutes, and the conversations are fantastic. They are really impressive, and I love it, Better than the article, I think.
Right, like you're learning things from the article that you wrote, and you're like, shit, why didn't I think about that?
Well, actually, it just offers kind of a different take on some of the things, which is what you would expect, right?
Right.
So that's what's really fun.
Excellent.
So what is your take on the diversity, inclusion, and the role it plays within peer-to-peer learning?
I think it's hugely important. I think the language has gotten politicized horribly. And I think that when you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, I don't know why you would want uniformity, inequity, and exclusion, right? We certainly don't want those things. So we need those things. Now, because I don't believe it's my job to be the champion of terminology, especially when it's so misinterpreted and all that there. So I basically speak to it from the perspective of, do we have all the voices around the table that we need to have the conversation that we need to have? Do we have all the perspectives that are going to be required to help us make a good decision here? And so that all of a sudden everyone's cool with that language and they're fine with like what we're doing here. So it's kind of confounding that somehow they have such an issue with that terminology that, again, I think has just been, politicized and, kind of just, it's just not been good. So I think it's obviously crucially important.
For me, it comes back to those human
Go ahead.
aspects, really, right?
Right.
It's about listening. It's about respecting each other. We do it in our families. Why isn't it okay? And why are we not doing it more in the workplace? And in fact, Quinn, with all that remote working we've been talking about, it plays a role in that as well. When we're working now away from each other, not in an office, how do you become inclusive? And I've seen that in the whole COVID time. We've learned how to be more inclusive, more respectful, understand. We've met each other's family members, pets, everyone, and we know each other more for some reason.
One of the things that I do for companies, because as you know, my work really with teams is based on taking what the highest performing CEO peer advisory groups around the world have been doing for decades and how to bring those principles and practices into their companies. Now, when CEOs, and it doesn't matter what group they're in, they could be Vistage, they could be YPO, they could be REF, they could be whatever. Every one of those groups has some mechanism for having conversations that help people make good decisions, right? Some use a version of a case method. Others, like a Vistage, uses something called issue processing. Okay. And there are questions and they go through their protocol and all with it. And what's interesting about it, and you've probably seen this in the book, is that we learn very directly and intentionally. There's no question about that. But it's this kind of collateral learning that is really where the big lessons come from. So this is where it's what we learn from how we learn. So as CEOs engage in that particular process of issue processing, if you will, they are challenged to what? To be really present, to be engaged, to be a really good listener, to ask very precise questions. But maybe one of the biggest lessons of all is you learn how to lean into your curiosity. You question your assumptions. So for example, let's say, Naila, that you've made a decision on something, and I'm going to make an assumption about why you made that decision. The chances are good that the longer that conversation goes on, and maybe the more that I or someone else asks you a question about why you made that decision, I learned that the reason you made that decision had nothing to do with what I thought it was. It's something that's completely different, which now makes me understand it much better. So when we can learn, and every one of us does this, when we have gaps in information, we will fill it in with our own narrative. We're really impatient about that. We're just going to come up with our own stuff. We're wrong most of the time. So if we can get to a place where we can lean into our curiosity, take a breath, question our assumptions, not jump to conclusions and rush to judgment on things, and we become practiced at that, particularly in that group experience, now we can take that into our teams and we can be that person that models those behaviors for others. And so those kinds of things, are really powerful. And I think the more that we can actually have groups working alongside of teams in companies so that you can operationalize learning and you can get alignment behind strategic initiatives. There's so many things that you can do because groups are wired to help make for better individual contributors. Teams are not. Teams are designed to create a shared work product or to achieve some kind of a shared goal that they're looking to do.
I like that.
And we need both. We at least need the activities of both in our organizations.
Let's take this conversation into the Across the Pond segment.
Oh, yes.
Because I know you've worked internationally.
Yep.
Naila, you want to take us across the pond?
Across the pond.
Yeah, I guess what's interesting to hear from you, Leo, is the differences you see between say, the Americas and the Europes when it comes to peer learning? Are there any differences?
What's really interesting is I've seen it less in practice. I think when you put people in a situation where they recognize that the rules of engagement are different, they respond accordingly. So whether it's dealing with a group in China or dealing with a group in the UK, there's certainly some different sensibilities about some things. Sometimes it may be a little harder for them in one culture to admit a mistake, for example, or admit they did something wrong because they don't want to lose face or that kind of a thing. But, it happens in the US as well, and it happens in the UK. If you go to groups and you ask them, I would say about 80% will tell you that they find it easier to share personal issues with their fellow members than they find it easier to share business issues, which is counterintuitive because these are business groups. But here's the thing. They don't want to compromise their currency as a fellow CEO or fellow key executive or whatever it may happen to be by admitting that there's something they don't know, they're underperforming, or that they treated someone poorly or whatever it may happen to be. And so they are inclined maybe to hold back. I've done an exercise oftentimes with groups like this where I'll start off and I'll ask someone, tell me the biggest mistake you've ever made professionally and what you learned from it. And so that person will kind of sheepishly say, okay, here's what I did and here's what I learned. And you get like 3 or 4 people down the row and someone says, hey, you think that's bad? Let me tell you what I did. Now it turns into a contest around the rest of the room where usually the people who responded early actually want another crack at telling a bigger, better story. They recognize in that moment, none of us knows everything. We've all screwed up. We've all made mistakes. It's okay. But, we live in this world where everybody's highlight reel is on LinkedIn. Everybody's killing it. Everybody's an expert on more topics than anyone could possibly imagine. So now they're sitting in a group and feeling like, man, I've got challenges. I've got things I'm going through. And you remind them, and so do all those folks that you're looking at on LinkedIn as well. That's your highlight reel. Here you get to be real with one another, and it's okay for us to do that. And I think when you can set that up, no matter what culture you're looking for or looking at, that becomes very powerful where people can just go, whew, and they can actually just be real with one another. And it's extremely powerful.
Which reminds me, we need to start working on that bloopers reel, Naila. We've definitely got some good ones. If we're all confessing.
Hopefully we don't have any today.
No, it's just going a little too smoothly. I got to shake things up or we're going to, be pitching a, perfect inning. Yeah, the first episode of the podcast that we did, we tried to do this on Zoom, which is not the platform for podcasting. Can be done. Long story short, as a professional videographer, I did not actually hit record. I thought I did. Yeah. We went through a whole 45 minutes of amazing insights from one of Naila's colleagues. He was very generous and said he would do it again, and we actually have never heard back from him. So, yeah.
I need to follow up.
Kind of blew that.
I've had it happen on 3 different occasions where I was a guest on a podcast and they didn't hit record, and you feel badly for the person because it's like it's mortifying. You're feeling like I don't want to tell this person that this is just doesn't exist now. This is not anywhere. So it's like, you know what? You just schedule another time you do it, and hopefully you say, hey, maybe it'll be better next time.
Exactly.
Because we all make mistakes. I mean, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. So
exactly my words.
Let's move on to the future. Crystal ball time.
The future.
So my first question for you is, will we still have traditional managers in 2040? Will that something look entirely different?
So you're going to hit me with that first? That's okay. I would say that things will flatten for sure, but I don't think that managers go away. But I do think organizations get flatter.
Is that because of the horizontal layers that you were talking about, where people are more on a level playing field?
Yeah, and I think that it's also going to provide with greater flexibility of teams and why they're formed and how they're formed. So it may not be fixed team situation. It may be a team created, to do a certain thing for certain period of time, and then some reorganization takes place depending on what the challenges for the organization may be. So it could get, I think, a lot more interesting, for folks, and we're going to have to move quickly, and we can't have a lot of hierarchy. We can't be waiting for. I mean, I've worked for, throughout my career, a lot of real command and control organizations where you need like 19 signatures to move on something, or you're in a crisis situation and somehow if you don't reach the top person, nobody can move. And worse yet, that person may be in Hong Kong and may be in bed and then they don't want to wake them up. I'm like, seriously? So you've got these kinds of things happening. So I think people are trying to eliminate that. They're trying to get their organizations, I think, to be flatter and function in a way where they can be far more nimble.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, with agentic AI in, say, 10, 15 years, very advanced, you're not going to need as many middle-level people. It's going to be more like, I don't know if it'll be more accounts-based or more role-based, but it's essentially people that are overseeing an agentic process versus people doing a lot of the traditional things that we used to do before. So Naila might be creating a year-long communication strategy for a major company that she implements largely herself. I might be overseeing product development for an apparel brand that's not just design, but looking at everything from strategy to supply chain. So that's kind of where I see things going from a management point of view, because your various AIs are going to be performing these roles, and you will still need a human to make sure that we don't end up with products like salt and vinegar donuts, which an AI might think is, well, people love salt, they love vinegar, they love donuts. Why not put them together?
You never know.
I think there's a reason you haven't seen them on the shelf yet. So I know there are savory donuts out there, but I think Naila calls them biscuits.
They have salt and vinegar chips, so maybe it could work for a donut. Who knows?
I like that. But your point, it leads to that thing about, the accountability and confidence in decision making, because where I am right now, a simple thing in communication can go through many layers of, hey, someone needs to sign this off. But the more confident you are in your decisions, the better you're going to have. No need for a manager. So everyone's accountable, responsible.
I'm hoping it'll create greater clarity. It's one of the biggest issues in the workplace today. If you ask most people what they need from their leader for them to be more effective at their job, that's number one on the list. They just need clarity. They need clarity about their role, their future, how it connects to the broader purpose of the organization, you name it. But that dialogue and that clarity is really about the values and how we not just have them on the wall, but how we live those values starts to become really, really important. And our values should be driving our decision making. So the better that we can do those things and we understand them and make them part of just not what we do, but who we are, that all of a sudden obviously makes a big difference.
Very well said.
So,
would you like to take us to the wrap, Naila?
Yes, I was going to say that. So before we do wrap up, Leo, for listeners who want to start building more, building peer advantage in their organizations, so more peer-to-peer learning, what's the one thing they should be focusing on?
Probably buying the second edition of the book, Peer Novation, and they can learn all about it. It's all right there. And I was very lucky and feel very grateful that Amy Edmondson, who I mentioned earlier, who's the top scholar in the world in psychological safety, she coined the term. She wrote the foreword for the book. And I think, she recognizes how important this work is when it comes to creating psychological safety in CEO organizations and the lessons they can teach us for our companies, for our teams. So it's pretty, what's nice about it, what makes it work is that it's not a prescriptive approach. I don't walk in any team, any group, anything and tell people what they should or shouldn't do. I just give them the models and frameworks that allow them to decide that for themselves. And then we build intentionality into that in a way that makes it sustainable. Because all too often, there's some great content out there that unfortunately can be difficult to operationalize because there's just no mechanism for being able to keep it front and center. And those things kind of get lost in the day-to-day of what we do. And I think part of why Peer Novation is so effective is, A, we keep it very intentional, and B, when peers are driving it amongst themselves and we're not just relying on a top-down approach, it makes a big difference.
We'll be buying this.
So it's a shameless plug for the book, but that's where we are.
I'm glad you got that work done. I would have felt bad if we didn't. Well, that wraps up this episode of Now, Near, and the Future. You can find us on all the usual platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and if you want to watch, on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Now, Near, Future. or visit us at nownearfuture.com.
And if you love the podcast, subscribe, leave a review, and tell your colleagues. If you don't love it, just remember that peer feedback is how we will improve.
Leo, remind us where we can find you on social and on the web.
Sure. Well, please connect with me on LinkedIn. It's, of course, Leo Bottary, Leobottary. I do post on X from time to time as well. But then, of course, peernovation.biz. You can learn all about what we do there as well. And you can reach out to me through the website as well, if not on LinkedIn. And I just appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
That was. And it was quick. So there's a lot more I'm going to be reading. I might be bothering you later because I might be seeing things that, oh my God, I do this. But it's been amazing having you and us learning about the peer power that's transforming the world and the organizations. So yeah, hope to see you again.
You bet. Thank you.
As always, stay curious and keep dreaming.
And see you in the future.